Hello again, and welcome back to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast coming to you from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Empire. I just realized that given my co-host love for the Sith, I'm pretty sure the Empire knows exactly where we are. My name is Garrett K. Jones, and joining me for this week's Rebellious transmission is my co-host,
Brian Karasik. Good evening, folks. Good to see you again, Garrett.
Good to see you too. With Stanley Cup finals in full swing, it's safe to use the parlance that we are skating one man down as our other co-host, John Mark Tolley, is out on vacation with his family. Good time to get out of Dodge and go see other parts of the country.
Outrageous.
Yeah, I know, right? Meanwhile, I'm stuck here in the hottest part of California, and thankfully today is a really nice cool day, but we're set to have like 107-degree temperatures from like Wednesday all the way through the weekend.
I'm on the other side in North Carolina where it is not only hot but also humid. No, we're not quite as hot as you, but the added humidity makes it feel like you're walking outside into somebody's mouth, which is always a pleasant feeling.
Yeah, I
glad with a chance of soup tonight.
I love that. So this week we're going to be talking about our favorite bounty hunters throughout the galaxy. Brian and I were talking about some of the different topics that we might discuss, and we both just landed on the idea of something that is interesting to both of us, and that is bounty hunters. As you guys can see, for those of you watching on YouTube, I have a pirate flag behind me because bounty hunters are like pirates. They have a code, and it's more of a guideline, really. So why don't you get it started, Brian?
Well, first off, I like thinking about what things in Star Wars are present to us about the economy, and I think it says a lot about the lawless nature of Star Wars. That bounty hunter and smuggler are arguably the two most common professions. Like if you ask someone like, what would you be if you were in the Star Wars universe? If it's not Jedi or Sith, it's bounty hunter or smuggler. That's what we see, which tells me there's not a lot going on as far as law enforcement in this galaxy. And I always thought that was always what I described as what appealed to me about Star Wars over Star Trek. Now, I got nothing against Star Trek. I do like the series, but Star Trek is like a clean, bright, futuristic kind of sci-fi, whereas Star Wars is kind of busted. From the time we first see Han hit the hyperdrive on the Millennium Falcon and it does not work, I'm like, this is the kind of sci-fi I like.
Yeah.
And similarly, there's absolutely no, like, the law enforcement is barely present. Smugglers abound, and when somebody's wanted, the cops can't go get them. Let's hire a bounty hunter. So I think it's just an interesting aspect of the galaxy that I like to ponder.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I think is really interesting is, I've never really looked at Star Wars as being actually true sci-fi. I feel it's more of a mashup of multiple genres, but mostly science fiction fantasy. There are a lot
space
of heavy,
opera.
Yeah, space opera for sure. But there's a lot of fantasy elements involved that you would see in traditional sword and sorcery type storytelling.
You mean like IG-100 robots that are the advanced independent AIs, but they still use pole arms? I like that.
Well, I was thinking, IG-88 or IG-11 would be more akin to like a thrall, really. I mean, they are brought to life to do one particular job, and for the most part, they don't have any true sentience of their own. But I mean, eventually, obviously, IG-88 develops some level of sentient capacity, but I mean, that's essentially what they are. And then you've got, your various different races and different aliens, which could be different species throughout a fantasy world in general. Trendishans, could be some kind of dragon folk. So having these different bounty hunters, it would make sense, especially when you've got realms that are consolidated power in various parts, and then you've got the more lawless outer rim and the far reaches of the galaxy and the unknown areas where you have much more chaos going on than you do organization. But even within the core systems of Star Wars, even on Coruscant, there's a huge criminal underbelly.
More or less the bottom half is my understanding.
Yeah, and so the closer you get towards the planet's actual surface, the more likely you are to see that criminal element. Whereas the higher echelons of the planet, you're going to see criminality, but you're going to see a different kind, because you've got the people who are incredibly wealthy, plus the politicians, and while they're breaking the laws, they're also the ones writing the laws, and they're the ones finding the loopholes.
It occurs to me that the Jetsons are representative of Coruscant's social structure. In the Jetsons, we never see the surface of the planet. We only see these buildings on these high poles, the high rises. And we talk about that in a number of Star Wars novels that take place on Coruscant, where we see nobles, dignitaries, Jedis who go into the lower levels. There's hundreds and hundreds of floors of Coruscant before you actually get to the core. Core, the surface. I always thought that was interesting. So who's your favorite bounty hunter? Do you have one off the top of your head? You must.
It's kind of interesting. Like, I've been trying to rack my brain since we started discussing this last week. And as far as bounty hunters go, Boba Fett's always been a fan favorite of mine, just because, he's so mysterious. He's got the cool.
He defines the trope.
He does. And I mean, he's of the bounty hunters that get recruited by Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back, which is really the only time you see bounty hunters aside from Jabba's palace. The one who shows up and is the most active is Boba Fett. And I think it's really kind of cool, because he's quiet. He doesn't say much. He seems to be pretty effective, but that's about it. We don't get to see much from Dengar. We don't get to see much from IG-88 or was it Bosk?
Yeah.
And we don't get to see anything from Zuckuss or Forlong. And all of those characters are in that shot of the Executor when they're being given their assignment from Vader.
You gotta see this group as bounty hunter royalty. These are the ones Vader hired. He's not just like posting on Facebook Marketplace, right? These are known quality hunters. So you got to think when we're introduced to them in Empire Strikes Back, these are the best of the best.
Yeah. And
I like the moment. What really sold Boba Fett for me, in addition to the mysterious armor, which is less mysterious now, obviously, but Vader's line, "No disintegrations," pointedly at Fett. I just like that moment. Like there's a bit of a banter back there. "No disintegrations," like this time is sort of unspoken. I feel like Fett's burned Vader before, and they've probably had words.
Yeah, there does seem to be a little bit of history there. And I just, one of the things I think it's interesting, especially when we go back into the into some of the lore that was developed in prior to Disney's ownership of the franchise, as well as since their ownership, is like Trask, not Trask, but Bosk being a Trandoshan. Trandoshans were notorious for enslaving Wookiees, and the fact that he is being hired to find Han Solo and Chewbacca and the Millennium Falcon as a known commodity, that's just got to be that's just got to be like the icing on top of the cake for him. Not only does he get to hunt down a known runaway smuggler for the Empire and for Jabba the Hutt, he gets to get his hands on a Wookiee.
This is culturally significant to him, yeah.
Yeah, this is the hunt of hunts.
Not just enslavement. Wookiee pelts are a huge trophy in Trandoshan culture.
Right. And so I think that was kind of a neat thing. And we did get to see some of the Trandoshan culture in Clone Wars. I wish we got to see a little bit more of it. But yeah,
I wish they looked more dragony. I wanted more of a snout on them. They look more like frogs to me.
Yeah.
I wanted draconians.
Yeah, that would have been so cool.
But Star Wars has a history of putting monkey faces on things. Like if you're going to make something like a Star Wars alien, chances are it's going to get a monkey face. The Fathier, the horse things that they ride around on in the new trilogy, they're just monkey face horses. Lost cats, it's just monkey face cat.
Well, and I think part of that has to do with well, especially going back to the idea of the transitions, like when you have an actor inside of a practical costume like that, if you're unable to fit the servos and motors for something fully remote controlled,
At least in 1980.
Yeah, at least in 1980. I mean, at least at that point, you've got something, very Planet of the Apes like, where the actor inside the suit can open their mouth and the character's mouth opens. And so having anything extended like that means your actor is going to have to do something far more exaggerated to make the face open. Whereas something that's a little bit more stubby and I'm gonna throw out a word here, brachiocephalic, kind of like a pug dog.
Oh, very nice. Sure.
It makes it easier for that movement to take place from a production side of things.
Have you seen the meme of Kermit the Frog with a black cloak? Right. That character, I wish they had taken this route, but they didn't. But that character to me will always be Darth Batrachius. Speaking of the strong silent, thank you. Speaking of the strong silent type, I was an IG-88 kid as far as the bounty hunters went. Bosk was pretty cool, but as I said, I wanted him to be more dragony than he was. Dengar was just a guy with some bandages on his head. It didn't grab me at all. Fett, pretty cool, but IG-88, I was more interested in him as a robot.
Yeah.
And which the strong silent type, our audience will probably know this, but of course the IG-88 prop is an immobile statue in Empire Strikes Back. He stands there at attention because he has no moving parts at that point.
Yeah.
An interesting role, but
I'm sure you've read it. Forlom too.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, because Forlom is actually, like, I'm looking at Wikipedia. I'm gonna pop this up on our screen here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But right here in this picture, you've got Forlom right over here in the back corner behind Bosk, and you can't see Zuckuss because he's being blocked by Vader right over here. But Forlom is just, I don't know if it's a guy in a suit just holding a shotgun. I mean, that's quite clearly a shotgun right there.
Yeah, sure.
But it could just as easily be the same as IG-88, where it's just a statue.
Now, I had the Zuckuss figure that you had to send away proofs of purchase for. But that was when they were mislabeled. I think we discussed that on a previous episode where they came. Forlom was the I forget the species, but anyway, Zuckuss and Forlom traded names on the labeling.
Yeah,
I'm not sure when exactly they corrected that.
I think, I don't know.
Is he a Gant?
You know what? Let me look that up because now I want to know. Zuckuss. Here we go. Zuckuss, he's a Gand.
A Gand.
Well,
I called it, although I confess I did say Gant. I'm going to own that.
Yeah. He worked with Forlom. What's interesting is this particular crew, and we keep mentioning them as being bounty hunter royalty. But did you ever read Shadows of the Empire?
No.
Okay, so I've got
shameful. I know. I apologize. I'm objectively wrong for not having read that.
Well, you'll at some point. I recommend you get your chance, because what's interesting is the cover art for the novel. The version of Prince Shizor looks very much like Michael Ironside with green face makeup and a ponytail.
Yeah,
which I thought was kind of interesting. But in the book and in the graphic novel version. There is a point towards the end of the story where Boba Fett has been dodging Bosk and Forlom and Zuckuss, not Dengar, but I think there's at least, and I think IG-88 is in that group as well. But he's been dodging these four who have been just trailing him across the galaxy from the time he gets Han Solo in the carbonite to the time that he gets to Tatooine. And what's interesting is that he is fighting against other bounty hunters, other people in his profession, who are trying to steal his prize so that they can get the pay. And it just shows how highly competitive this market is.
Sure.
But what I thought was great is he ends up tricking them and using both Zuckuss and Forlom and getting everyone else confused, thinking that it was him in the armor flying away with on a speeder with Solo.
I think I remember hearing about that. Philosophical question for you, Garrett. Can a bounty hunter take out a bounty?
You mean,
So,
like,
for example,
bounty hunter?
Right. For example, Fett is going after a target. He knows Dengar and Bosk are both going after the same target. Can Fett take out a contract on Dengar and Bosk to divert their attention, because now a bunch of bounty hunters are looking for them too? I don't see any reason why not, but it seems unethical. I don't know. It seems like,
well, I mean, we're talking about
maybe just frowned upon.
Yeah, I remember, like I said, pirates.
Sure.
Guidelines. No, well, I mean, that's a very good question, because, like, I don't think there's really an issue of ethics behind it, because we're talking about a profession that they find it completely ethical to hunt people down for a living. They make money off of the capture, and sometimes it's returning a lost slave. Sometimes it's returning someone who owes another person money, or it's a political prisoner. You name it, they're probably going after it. So I don't know how.
Do you recall the Clone Wars episode where Asajj Ventress runs up against a young Boba Fett?
Yes, I do.
And she leaves him boxed up and ships him to his employer. One of the few times we see someone get someone over on Fett. And who is it? Ventress.
Yeah, and which makes me wonder just how good of a bounty hunter, like, from what we've seen in canon now, between what happened during the Clone Wars, what's happened in the movies, what's happened in the book of Boba Fett, how good of a bounty hunter is Boba Fett at this point? Like, is he really that good, or is it just a lot of people speaking great about him because he's had a few lucky strikes?
I mean, Fett and Han Solo have this in common. We do not see on screen them ever do what they are famous for doing. We are told Han Solo is an amazing smuggler. We are told Boba Fett is the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. We don't see that happen. Fett gets Solo, but he didn't catch him. I've made this joke before. Fett X. All Boba Fett does is pick up a package that Darth Vader packaged up and delivers it to Jabba the Hutt. He's a transport service. He didn't catch that dude. He is. Same thing with Han Solo. We meet Han Solo hiding for his life. He's under a death sentence. Greedo attempts to kill him because Han Solo was a bad smuggler. Yeah, that's it. When we meet him, he has a death sentence on his head because he failed to smuggle spice for Jabba the Hutt. And 30 odd years later, we see him again in Force Awakens. Now he's got 2 death sentences because, again, he's a bad smuggler. I think both of those guys have excellent PR. I think it's funny that they're sort of canonically, maybe not canonically, but in fan canon, they are just ancient nemesis, to the point that even Family Guy made a joke where, like, the chicken and Peter are Han and but I mean, they're both just. I think they have a good. They probably share a marketing agent. They're like, hey, so this is what we're going to do. Everybody thinks you're the best bounty hunter in the galaxy. We're going to keep that up.
Yeah.
I made that joke. Mark Anthony Austin, who is one of the Boba Fetts on screen, he plays Boba Fett in the New Hope Special Edition. Mm-hmm. I got to hear him on a previous podcast I used to work on, and he's a great guy and has done a lot of animation work, just unbelievable history. But I've made that joke. I was like, he didn't really catch anybody. He's like, well, you don't know what went on behind the scenes there. All right, fair enough.
Yeah. Well,
do you have any bounty hunters? They've introduced a few in the new canon, but I gotta bring up. I would be remiss if I don't use a minute or two to mention Black Chrysantan, who I think is a fascinating character. And if you guys if folks at home, if you've not listened or if you've not read the comic books, Chrysantan is the only Wookiee in Trandoshan history to surrender himself to the Trandoshans. He was exiled from Kashyyyk and he went to the trenches. He's like, well, all right, may as well. So he signed up to fight in their gladiatorial arena because it seemed like the best option. I don't know. He's not a real talkative fella. He didn't explain it, but I think he's a great addition to canon. They've added this whole like dark side version of the original heroes where we've got Dr. Aphra and Kersantan, BT1 and 000, and
well,
I guess
what's
Vader.
interesting is Black Chrysanthemum's not the only Wookiee.
Did I get that wrong?
Well,
no, not the only.
In canon, he is, but if you actually go back, so part of Shadows of the Empire, what that story does is it fills in some of the gaps between the events of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Okay.
So it explains.
I gotta get that.
You really do. But it explains how Leia comes about the Bouche armor, which Bouche is an Ubesian bounty hunter who ends up getting killed. And she takes on the armor and she explains what happens. And they also, and Chewbacca actually gets a haircut and gets a little bit of hair dye because he's a dead ringer for another Wookiee bounty hunter named Snuva.
Are you saying all Wookiees look alike?
No, I am not.
With a little dye, though.
But based on the fur coloring and stuff like that, Snuva and Chewbacca are very similar in appearance. And so there's a point where like Chewbacca even makes a complaint about how the hair on his head has been trimmed up and cut. And if you notice, and I'm not sure entirely.
I just want to see Chewbacca walking into an Ulta salon to get a drink. Somebody quit that day. Like, no, I'm not doing this.
Looks at the Return where his hair looks a little different. But yeah, so
I gotta say, I mentioned this to you previously as we were discussing this, but I'm going to own up to the audience at home. I was embarrassingly far from 1983 when I learned that Bouche is actually a person other than the person that Leia was dressing. I thought it was just a made up character. She's just like, let me put on a funny helmet. But it was post Disney buyout that I learned that. So yeah, I probably should read Shadows of the Empire. That's embarrassing. I have to say, I got a little burned out on the EU when I read the second book that Han and Leia got married in.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, like now we're just throwing anything at the wall. And it seemed like there were a lot of books that covered the same ground as the courtship of Princess Leia. You know, oh boy, here's another foreign dignitary that Leia has to make nice with because she's a diplomat and he gets a crush on her. Han's jealous, and won't these two kids ever just settle down? And it's just enough with the Han Leia romance.
Yeah, it's I didn't read a whole lot of the EU books. Most of what I read were the things that kind of filled in some gaps for me through, like, I mean, obviously Shadows of the Empire was huge for me.
Anything with Darth or Sith in it, I read that.
Yeah. I did read one of the Clone Wars books. It was it's called The Cestus Deception, and a very interesting book that deals with a negotiation that goes haywire on this planet called Ord Cestus, which is run by an insectoid race similar to the Geonosians, but very, very
I've been to Ord Cestus.
Yeah, and so what I thought was interesting is mentioning Bouche. Like, Bouche actually does show up in an animated episode.
One of those little shorts on there where it's predominantly the female characters. Leia's in the Bouche helmet, not Bouche himself.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, it's one of the Forces of Destiny episodes.
That's the one.
Yeah. And then there's Star Wars Galaxy Adventures.
Is it just me? Am I just 8 years old, or do we all want Bush's last name to be Dag?
No, Dag. Dag would be a better one. That way,
Bush
you
Dag.
know, Bush Dag. That way, the you know, any smuggler, you know, with
Sure.
Dexia would
Now,
switch that around.
we've always had bounty hunters in canon, of course, as we've been discussing. But I think really, like, perhaps the new bounty hunter royalty has got to be Din Djarin, the Mandalorian,
Yeah.
right? Like, he really brought to my knowledge, he's the first bounty hunter that's really been the protagonist of a major property, like comic books and books aside. And of course, we see, and I think this is an interesting aspect of Star Wars, where some of the most fascinating characters we see immediately go against the established norms of whatever their organization is. Anakin Skywalker is interesting to us because he goes against the rules of the Jedi. He marries secretly. He gets Padme pregnant secretly. He turns to the dark side. These are things no Jedi had done in 1,000 years, and he does it almost as soon as we meet him. And same thing with the Mandalorian. We meet him, and he's clearly a galaxy-respected bounty hunter. And in episode 2, roughly, is when he officially goes back on, breaks his word and goes back on his contract, something that we are told bounty hunters never do. So I think it's an interesting approach that they took it, and we like to see iconoclasts. We could watch bounty hunters capture people all day long. I can bring in cold, I can bring in warm, that sort of thing. That's a cool line. But it's even cooler when we see how strict he is with his code and then violates it for Grogu. And I think it's a nice touch.
Yeah, I think it is too, because this brings up something we talked about when we were doing our discussion on Palpatine last week. But you've got these characters that are, for the most part, they're true believers until they face something that challenges those beliefs. When, for example, when Din Djarin finally encounters Bo-Katan and her enclave of Mandalorians, and they start taking off their helmets, his first reaction is it's visceral.
This is not the way.
He physically steps away from them, and he's just like, no. This is not how this is done.
I love how Katie Sackhoff does that interaction, because I think it's really cool that, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, but if you've ever gone to a neighborhood watch meeting and there's somebody there in full camouflage with tactical gear on, dude, it's just a neighborhood watch. I feel like that's kind of how I feel Bo-Katan and her people see Din Djarin's group. It's you guys are way too into this, let's, as with any belief system, there's going to be the general, what I would call the regular, and then people who take it to the nth degree. Not everyone is taking multiple wives. Not everybody is, violent about their beliefs, and not everybody leaves their helmet on from the time they're an infant. How does he shave? He has such a nice, anyway.
Well, he does it when nobody's looking. My first question is, how does he effectively eat? Because the scene where he's drinking soup and he lifts his helmet, there's no way to
it's so much trouble.
Dude, it's he probably got a straw. Who knows?
Having worn a gas mask for many hours at a time, the gas masks have a tube. There's got to be some sort of a feeding tube situation where he's just sipping yogurt or something. But that's these things always appeal to me. And I gotta say, prior to The Mandalorian, I was really disinterested in Mandalorians as a people. I thought it was very interesting, the Mandalorian armor, when we didn't know about it. And then once we learned about it, they wouldn't shut up about it. And honestly, Sabine Wren, I find her to be insufferable. I do not care for Sabine Wren as she's portrayed as a cartoon, as she's portrayed in live action. It's not that I don't like the actress, or I don't she's a bad character. In canon, I don't like the character because of how she is portrayed. Yeah. If I'm making a mistake, I'm not saying it's a bad character. I'm saying it's a well-played character whose motivations I do not like. I don't like how she shirks her duties in the Ahsoka series. I don't like how she talks to Ahsoka in the Ahsoka series. And I do not like how she made candy raver spray paint culture part of Mandalorians. Like I didn't need that.
Yeah,
I like the aspect of Mandalorians, and any one of the Mando mercs will tell you, Mandalorian armor is very personalized to their own role. But I was disinterested in that entire culture until the Mandalorian show, and it brought me back around. Let's see more. The Beskar armor, fascinating, and the armor is really cool. I've always seen, you see this a lot where people will get like the Nerf guns and then paint them up and customize them to look in Galaxy. One day, when I win the lottery, Garrett, I'm gonna make a full Mando costume, but I'm gonna colorize the costume to the Nerf gun instead of the other way around. I want like the bright blue and orange, like the
cool.
toy. I think that'd be fun. And also if I ever get 3D mold or 3D printing as an option, which I never would, but given limitless time and funding, Bananalorian, it's gonna be a thing. Get a banana suit, put in it, yeah, for sure. The Bananalorian's got to happen.
Oh, that sounds all nine kinds of wrong. All right.
Well, I already thought of Bananakin Skywalker, but I couldn't get that together either.
I did have a little bit of a breakthrough this last weekend with my son. We were over at my parents' house, and we got to watching. It was the end of Clone Wars and the start of episode 3 at my parents' house. We're catching it on TNT because they've been broadcasting them for the last couple of weeks, doing them in sequence. And this is the first time my son's ever really just sat down to watch, and he thought it was so cool. And so he started asking questions, and I'm like, yeah, because we started watching right when Dooku, literally disarms Anakin.
Nice.
And then
unhand me.
Yeah, right. And so Yoda shows up, and my son's like, "Is that Yoda?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's Master Yoda. He's the wisest, oldest Jedi there is." He goes, "Oh." And then Yoda ignites a green lightsaber. And at this point, my son's only seen red and blue. And he's like, "It's green?" And then Yoda starts hopping around like a frog on ketamine. And
some people look down their nose at that scene, but I think, of course, that's how Yoda fights. He's teeny. He's got to fight that way.
Well, and if you look at the Ataru style in canon, that's exactly how a lot of saberists will fight. That was the style that Ahsoka uses.
Mm-hmm.
She uses mostly Form 4, the Ataru, but she also works in with some of the Gemso that Anakin uses, the Form 5. And so she, really aggressive moves, but she does it with more of an acrobatic grace.
She's just not 2 feet tall, so it's not
right.
It's not quite as acrobatic. It
makes sense that a character like Yoda, who is so small, would favor a fighting form that has him constantly moving and making him an impossible target.
That reminds me, just a bit off topic, but in the Hobbit movies, it always amused me to see the dwarves fight the orcs, because the dwarves are constantly making this big telegraphed swing across their bodies, and the orcs just jump every time. Guys, I think they're onto you. Try a different angle. But no, I love that fight as well. I got to have a lot of conversations with my daughter about lore of Star Wars this past couple days, because for Father's Day, I received the Lego Emperor's Throne Room playset, and my daughter helped me put it together. And she's 6, so she this is really her first Lego playset, and so she got a lot of practice sorting pieces, and they're like, "That's not how that goes. It's like a puzzle piece. Keep turning until it fits." And there's a lot of learning experience, but it was important to me to see her do this more than it was to have it together. And we put it together. It took 2 days, and if I hadn't had her to help, it might have taken an afternoon. But it was so much more valuable for having that moment with her. I'm glad you got that with your son.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. So we are getting ready to wrap up. What are some of your final thoughts, Brian?
I think it's an interesting, to come back to what you said at the beginning, I think bounty hunters are an interesting career because it's not so much a career as a way of life. And they do have a code they live by. And by and large, we see them live by it. We've never seen a bounty hunter take out a bounty on a competitor. And I think it would seem uncouth, if nothing else. And it's an interesting role. And again, I'm fascinated by that as a career choice because, again, it speaks to the society of the galaxy that these stories take place in, wherein there is money to be made bringing in fugitives, which means there is a virtually limitless supply of such fugitives, which also implies a limitless supply of the crimes for which they are wanted or lawless warlords who want them back for whatever reason. It speaks to the lawlessness of the galaxy, and I think it makes it a more interesting story.
I completely agree. And the thing is, like, I remember playing I was mentioning last week playing the role playing game, and playing creating bounty hunters was so much fun because there are so many different skills you could apply. There was a lot more flexibility because you can play the character as either lawful neutral or chaotic neutral, to go off of the D&D parlance. And bounty hunters are not necessarily evil characters. They're kind of in the middle. They're that gray area between what is considered legal and illegal.
Sure. And really, for that matter, I mean, bounty hunters in our galaxy are generally working with law enforcement. They are retrieving people who have jumped bail. And to stick with the D&D metaphor, a lawful good paladin could very easily be a bounty hunter in that he is seeking a chaotic evil rogue who's escaped custody.
Yep.
Although the paladin would probably refuse payment.
Yeah, they're always noble like that.
So tiresome.
Speaking of D&D, did you happen to see Honor Among Thieves?
Oh, yeah.
So
do you know where that title comes from?
I would just assume the statement about there's no honor among thieves.
First edition Dungeon Master's Guide has a picture of two thieves, one of whom has clearly been killed by a trapped chest, and the one who did not get killed is looting the body. And it says there is no honor among thieves. I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. It's a deep cut back to the 80s, if not 70s. But I love that series. I grew up watching that TV show, the Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, me too.
And I'll make D&D jokes with you all night long, but probably not on this podcast.
Probably not. All right, Brian. Well, why don't you go ahead and tell the good folks out there where they can find you?
Sure thing. Anybody interested in following along with a well-curated and lovingly attended collection of Sith archives, of Sith culture, art, and lectures is welcome to join us over on Facebook at the Sith Library and Archives. And you can, if I posted anything on Instagram, you can follow me on Corrosis, as you see there. Speaking of West End games, that was the third Sith character I made, and it's the only thing that I ever wrote in 8th grade that I still like, Darth Corrosis.
All right. As for me, you can find me on Instagram and X at GKJ_publishing, where I talk about my books, The Archives of the Synchronous. Currently 5 books out in my fantasy series. But I also talk about my show, The Right Way, where we talk book recs, author interviews, and creative writing tips. I'm coming to the end of season 7, and I'm looking forward to it because we've got some cool stuff coming up. Other than that, as far as War of the Stars, you can get a hold of us on our email, which is warofthestars1@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at war_of_the_stars1. Or you can find us on X/Twitter. I joke and call it Twix, but at War of the Stars 1. And our YouTube, and I keep forgetting to change this, but it should be SW Child, where John, our missing co-host, has a wonderful show called Star Wars Through the Eyes of a Child, where he is going through the Clone Wars series in canonical or chronological order with his daughter and getting her first-time reactions to the episodes. As far as connecting with us, obviously we are a part of the Geek News Now network. So you can find us on GNN through their YouTube and Spotify pages. Just look for Geek News Now Official. And then there are various links, and we'll post those to our social media platforms as well. You can also, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so on ko-fi.com/War of the Stars. I don't know about Brian, but I do like a good cup of coffee every now and then. And
Coffee.
So, what?
I said coffee at least. Sometimes I put a little extra in there.
Who doesn't, right? The other way that you can support us is through our store on spreadshirt.com/shop/War of the Stars, where you can get all sorts of cool t-shirts that we have available, including one that has our War of the Stars logo. With that said, we'll be back next week. John will be joining us, and the topic for our fourth week of the month is going to be cinematic journeys. We're going to be taking a look at Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and doing a critical review of the movie's themes, its cinematography, the score, and its place in the larger context of the series.
In only 30 minutes?
I'm sure we could do it. I mean, we'll spend probably less time talking about it than the senators were talking about policy changes. So, trust me, it will not be where liberty goes to die. Anyway, as we say in our sign off, this is not just your Star Wars. This is not just my Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. So until next time, may the Force be with you.
And also with you.